Welcome back to Juba Forensics PLC. Today we're going to talk about if fraud happens to you, whether that's in your business or in your personal life, you are not alone because it happens way more often than you think. Being the victim of fraud can make you feel like you are isolated and you maybe were dumb and you missed something and you should have figured that out sooner, and how could you trust that person whether you knew them or not. No, I promise you, you are not alone. So many people have been a victim of fraud over the years, and fraudsters, the ones performing the fraud, get smarter and smarter. They design better and better schemes to really, really trick people and tug at your heartstrings. So we're going to talk through just some statistics, and then we're going to talk through some examples of fraud so you know that you are not alone and that there are other people that have gone through this as well. Now, does that make it any easier if you lost a bunch of money that you'll never get back again? No. You absolutely can still be mad about it. You can still learn and grow from that process, but know that you're not the only person that has gone through this. There are others just like you, and you can recover and heal and move through this process. So 5% of all business revenue is lost on a yearly basis across the globe to fraud. That totals more than $5 trillion just in business fraud is lost every single year. And those schemes touch everybody. It touches businesses of all sizes, of all entity types. So it's touching the small mom and pop shop down the street, but it's touching really large companies like Apple and Google as well. Maybe not them specifically, but companies of their size and bigger fall victim to fraud. Companies that are only operating in the US, companies that are operating globally, all fall victim to fraud. So know that it happens whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're private or for-profit, doesn't make a difference. That's not going to protect you from fraud. That's not going to protect you from fraudsters. They're going to try to take advantage of your systems, game the system, and get money from you anyway, business and personal. And these schemes that fraudsters use, I mentioned it briefly before, they change constantly as new technology is coming out. As their schemes get found out and people start talking about them, they're going to pivot and come up with a new scheme to go from there. So I just got back from the ACFE's Global Fraud Conference, which was amazing, and I heard a speaker talk about something I had no idea even existed. And there are these call centers. So some of the fraud that comes through can be phone calls. I know we've all gotten the phone calls, or at least the voicemails, that say, hey, your car insurance or something along those lines needs to be redone, to give us a call back. So I assumed those were fraudsters doing it of their own volition, like they knew what they were doing. But I heard that there are call centers where people are forced to work in these fraud-related call centers, and they're forced, so they're usually coming in from another country. All of their documentation gets taken away from them, and they're forced to show up and make some of these phone calls and meet some of these quotas, sometimes threatened with violence, you name it, to place these calls and try to scam you and trick you out of your money. So that completely blew my mind that was even a thing that was happening. So know that it is not, sometimes it is very intentional. Someone knows that they are trying to get your money, and other times people may not have a choice and they're just doing the best they can with what they've got. Doesn't make it right that they're taking your money, but know that there are so many things out there that are constantly changing and growing in the fraud space that people like myself and others are trying really hard to stay on top of and get ahead of, so we can slowly bring down the number of fraud cases and the total loss of fraud across the globe. So it's not just business fraud. It's not just people taking cash from your business. It's not people stealing from the wealthy that own the companies. It's not just that. It is people stealing from other people. It is stealing on a personal level. So phone calls, I mentioned, you get random phone calls. The IRS is calling you and saying you need to wire them money. So I had one, I'm going to do some story time in here. So I had one phone call that came through to me personally, And at the time, I was not a forensic accountant. I just got out of the Marine Corps. I got a phone call on my cell phone that said, so I had jury duty, and a hurricane came through and closed the courts down. So I didn't have to go to jury duty, but that was my first time ever having to do anything related to jury duty. So I was a little nervous about the whole thing. So the fact that it got canceled, I thought that was weird. But I got a phone call on my cell phone that said, hey, you didn't show up to jury duty. And I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, because there was a hurricane. And I said that to him on the phone. He said, no, you were still supposed to be there. I was like, what do you mean? How did that, what? How did no one tell me this until right now? You know, like I was totally going along with what he said because I don't know anything about, I'd never been to jury duty before, didn't really know anything about it. And so then he starts telling me that he's with the deputy sheriff's office, all this stuff, and he wanted me to pay him money to kind of brush it away, make it go away. And I was like, pay you money? That doesn't make any sense. At the time, my ex-husband was a deputy sheriff. And so I'm like texting him, I'm like, why am I getting a phone call from one of your guys that I missed jury duty and I have to pay some money? That doesn't make sense. And so this guy, he just kept going. He kept trying on the phone to like really get me in on it. And eventually when my ex-husband answered back and said, no, we would never call you. If you actually missed jury duty and were in trouble, we'd show up at your door. Because if we called you, you'd have the opportunity to run. And we don't want you to do that. And I said, oh, man, I got him. And so on the phone with this guy, I told him, I said, I just want to let you know, Deputy, whatever he said his name was, I said, he was my husband at the time. I said, my husband is a deputy sheriff for Craven County, which is where I live and where I was supposed to report for jury duty. And he said, you're full of shit. And he said that they would never, ever call me, and because it would tip me off and you just show up at my door. So the guy kind of went off on the guy, just kept going off, and eventually he hung up, never heard from him again. So they really do try with some of these phone calls to dig in. Now, if you know right from the get-go that it is totally a scam, I know people that like to mess with them and ask a bunch of questions. Completely up to you, however you feel. I choose to let it go to voicemail, and when I see it's a scammy voicemail, I just delete it and I just move on from there. So not only do they do phone calls personally, but you'll get those text messages that say stuff about like an overdue toll, things along those lines. There are also some scams, and that's going to continue to, I think, become more and more prevalent. And I've also seen fraud in response to like things on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. If you're selling a big ticket item through one of those platforms, they will come in and try to also scam you that way. So another story time on this one. I, at the time, yet again, before I was forensic accountant, anything along those lines, was trying to sell a tuba on Facebook Marketplace. Tubas are very expensive, so it was a lot of hundreds of dollars that we were selling it for. And we really needed the money, and nobody wanted this tuba. After a couple of weeks and months of it being up there, someone did message us and say, hey, we will take your tuba. We're going to send you a check. If you go ahead and deposit the check, we're going to include a little extra if you could wire it back to us. And at first I was like, well, that's a little sketchy, but at least they're sending us a check, right? And if it's a fake check, my bank's going to catch it, right? So I deposited the check with my bank, and because I was taking money out, I had to go into the bank. So like the teller saw the check, everybody saw the check, took the cash out that he wanted, wired it the way he wanted it wired. And then after I wired it, that's when I realized it was fraud, because the guy got very excited when I wired that money, super excited, and he wanted me to do it again. He was like, I'm going to send you another check and you can send me more money. I was like, whoa, what? I was like, what do you mean? Why would I do that? You already paid me for the tuba and the shipping. I'm going to mail the tuba to you and call it a day. And so the second he started getting excited like that, I called the bank. And I said, hey, I think this is fraud. Can you check the check? And they pulled up the check on there and they said, no, it looks good and it cleared your bank account. I was like, okay, maybe it wasn't fraud and this guy's just a weirdo. I don't know. So turns out it took the bank about 5 days to figure out that it was a fake check. And it was a fake check, and because we withdrew cash and wired it to them, there was no way to get our money back. there was no way. So that money that was wired to him just came out of our bank account. So we really needed money. So we were selling this tuba hoping to increase our bank account. And instead, because we were victims of fraud, we lowered our own bank account on accident. I was so mad, and there was nothing anybody could do because the guy just disappeared. Stopped, disconnected the cell phone, deleted the Facebook profile, everything. So there were no breadcrumbs to even try to follow to get this person to try to get our money back. So yeah, that was one of my first experiences with fraud on my own, personal fraud. Yet again, I was really young, didn't know any better. I was not a forensic accountant. I didn't have any of that training, had no idea. So I share that story. It's a very vulnerable story, but it happens to people. I've heard stories of people's grandparents getting phone calls saying that their grandkids are being held hostage in whatever country it might be. And sometimes these fraudsters will actually pick a country that their grandchild is actually traveling to make it even worse and even more confusing. And instead of verifying with their grandkid that they're okay, the grandparent just pays the money. We're talking, I've heard of one case where the grandparent paid over $25,000 to get their grandkid back, only to find out that their grandkid was fine and was never taken hostage. So really sad, really unfortunate. It happens to more than just grandparents though. It happens to anybody that might be naive and not really sure and just believes the best in people, maybe a little bit of Pollyanna. You can also experience fraud in a divorce. If you're going through a divorce where maybe your soon-to-be ex is putting money where they shouldn't be putting money, hiding it somewhere that they shouldn't be. Maybe they've been funneling personal expenses through their business that they shouldn't be. There are so many different ways that money and assets can be hidden throughout the divorce process that you really need a forensic accountant to step in and help there. And then elderly fraud and abuse. I do have a whole separate video on an elderly fraud and abuse case example, but there are so many more examples than just the one that I shared as well. So know that if you have become a victim of fraud at any point, you are not alone. Whether that's business fraud, personal fraud, there are many, many people out there that experience fraud. There's a lot of emotions and feelings that go with that fraud, being a victim of fraud. Know that you can work through those emotions and come out the other side. And I do hope that if you are a victim of fraud, you can try to get some of your money back. I also hope that you, if you can, choose to prosecute so it goes on that person's record. And if you need any help at all working through some of these cases, please feel free to reach out to me. And that is all I have for today. So if you liked this video, please feel free to comment or share down at the bottom, and I will catch you next time.